I remember the day I first sensed the possibility of leaving behind a past filled with hardship and constant vigilance. After many long years of military service, where every sunrise came with an undercurrent of anxiety and uncertainty, I decided that it was time to return to a life built on family and home. I left behind the chaos of battle and the endless demands of duty for the promise of a quiet suburban existence in Chicago, a place where neighbors greeted one another with genuine smiles and every day offered a chance to rebuild. My new house, modest yet inviting, stood on a quiet street in a neighborhood that exuded a warmth I had almost forgotten existed. Inside those walls, familiar photographs and mementos of my military days served as bittersweet reminders of past valor, now transformed into relics of experience rather than sources of pain. My dear wife, Susan, became my anchor during this transition, a steadfast presence whose gentle support helped me adjust to civilian life. Together, we dreamed of a future where evenings were filled with heartfelt conversation, where the laughter of grandchildren might one day echo through our living room, and where the glow of a well-tended hearth symbolized renewal. Yet, even as I savored the tranquility of these early days, a persistent shadow of apprehension lingered in my mind, a quiet warning that perhaps the harmony I longed for might be more fragile than it appeared. I recalled my youthful optimism, and while the neighborhood offered comfort, my heart couldn't help but remember the relentless demands of a past life, where each day was a battle for survival. During those first months in Chicago, I immersed myself in the rhythms of suburban life. I spent long afternoons tending to a small garden in the backyard and evenings sitting on the front porch with a cup of coffee, listening to the murmur of conversation and distant sounds of children playing. It was a far cry from the regimented routines of military camps, where orders and duty dictated every moment. Here, the pace was gentle, almost lazy, a welcome change that allowed me to rediscover the simple pleasures of everyday living. The local diners, with their neon signs and friendly waitstaff, quickly became a favored spot for early morning coffee and casual chats with fellow residents. In these small moments of interaction, I began to feel a renewed sense of belonging. Yet, as I strolled down tree-lined avenues and exchanged greetings with longtime locals, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the past might still be reaching out to me. Every weathered door, every well-worn path in the neighborhood seemed to whisper tales of bygone eras, hinting that while I had left behind the battlefield, the scars of conflict might still reside deep within me. At night, as I sat by the fireplace and flipped through old photo albums, memories of valor and sacrifice mingled with the hope of redemption, forming a quiet dialogue between what had been and what could be. I wondered if the hard-won lessons of a soldier's life could ever fully translate into the gentle art of nurturing family bonds and community trust. In these reflective moments, I often found solace in the simple act of writing letters to myself, chronicling both the beauty and the subtle melancholy of my new life. My pen would glide across the paper, capturing the crisp air of autumn evenings, the soft glow of street lamps, and the rhythmic cadence of a city that had learned to balance modern hustle with enduring tradition. Each entry was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a quiet pledge that even after enduring years of hardship, there could still be room for hope and renewal. And as I wrote, I began to understand that every ending carried the promise of a new beginning, a sentiment echoed in the gentle rustling of the leaves and the quiet determination of those around me. It was in this spirit of cautious optimism that I embraced my new start. The challenges of reintegration were many, but with Susan by my side and a community that welcomed me with open arms, I dared to believe that I might finally find the peace I had long sought. Chicago, with its bustling streets and warm-hearted residents, slowly transformed from an unfamiliar territory into a canvas on which I could paint a fresh chapter of my life. The transition was neither immediate nor without its moments of solitude and doubt, but in the steady march of days, I discovered that life in America, its trials and triumphs alike, was a journey worth taking one step at a time. At first, the calm and promise of my new suburban life in Chicago seemed almost too good to be true. The gentle pace of community living, the simple pleasure of a hot cup of coffee on a crisp morning, and the quiet satisfaction of a well-kept home all filled me with a sense of hope that I had never known during my years of military service. However, beneath this serene facade, subtle fissures began to emerge, small disagreements and misunderstandings that gradually undermined the bonds I cherished. My son Michael, once a bright and eager young man, started to withdraw from family gatherings and seemed increasingly distant, as if the values and traditions I held dear no longer resonated with his modern outlook on life. At first, these changes were barely noticeable, a missed dinner here, a curt response there. But over time, the rift between us widened into something that felt insurmountable. Michael began to come home late, often with a terse demeanor and an air of indifference that left me both perplexed and pained. His reluctance to share details about his day or to engage in the kind of heartfelt conversation that once defined our relationship signaled the onset of a deeper disconnect. I found myself recalling the days when our home was filled with laughter and mutual respect, a time when he looked to me for guidance and comfort rather than criticism. Now, every encounter became a reminder of how much had changed. I tried desperately to bridge the growing gap. I would ask him about his work at the local auto shop, inquire if he needed help with household repairs, or simply invite him to sit down and share a meal. Yet, every attempt at conversation was met with cold silence or snappy remarks. One evening, when I offered to help fix a leaky faucet in his apartment, Michael's response was sharp and dismissive. He accused me of living in the past, of clinging to outdated ways that no longer had any relevance in his fast-paced, modern life. His words stung deeply, cutting through the remnants of the warm memories we once shared, leaving behind a bitterness that seemed to grow with each passing day. In the quiet moments after these confrontations, I would find myself pondering where it had all gone wrong. I questioned whether my steadfast adherence to the values I'd learned over a lifetime of discipline and sacrifice was somehow to blame. The familiar rituals of our family life, the Sunday dinners, the shared reminiscences about days gone by, and even the simple act of sitting together in silence, had all been eroded by a force I could neither comprehend nor control. Michael's behavior, increasingly defiant and aloof, was a painful reminder that the passage of time had transformed him into a stranger, someone whose world no longer aligned with mine. My attempts to understand his perspective led me to confront my own shortcomings. Perhaps I had failed to adapt, clinging to memories of a time when my authority was unquestioned and my experience was revered. Maybe my insistence on imparting wisdom from my past was seen as an intrusion rather than a loving gesture. As I grappled with these thoughts, I found that each day brought not only new conflicts, but also an ever-deepening sense of isolation. The once solid foundation of our family was crumbling, leaving me to wonder if the bonds of blood could truly withstand the relentless march of time and the evolving tides of modern life. Every conversation felt like a battle, a clash of generational ideals, where my long-held beliefs were dismissed as relics of an era that had long since passed. Michael's rejection of my counsel was not merely a personal slight. It was emblematic of a broader cultural shift, a divide that seemed to grow wider with each passing argument. The familiar warmth of our home was now punctuated by moments of cold silence, and I could no longer recall the days when our differences were easily reconciled with a shared meal or a kind word. Instead, every interaction was fraught with tension, a silent acknowledgement that something precious was being irretrievably lost. As the months wore on, the persistent fractures in our relationship began to take a toll on my spirit. I spent many sleepless nights contemplating the widening chasm between us, feeling both the sting of rejection and the burden of responsibility. The once comforting memories of our family life became bittersweet reminders of what might have been, a poignant counterpoint to the reality of a son who no longer recognized the value of tradition or the importance of a father's wisdom. In these long, lonely hours, I wondered if reconciliation was even possible, or if the gulf between our worlds had grown too vast to bridge. The quiet despair that settled in the corners of my heart was a constant companion, a silent witness to the slow disintegration of the ties that had once bound us so tightly. That fateful morning arrived without warning, altering the course of my life in ways I had never imagined. I woke up early, as I always did, preparing for another day in what I believed would be the calm continuation of my suburban routine. The soft light of dawn filtered through the curtains of my modest Chicago home, and for a fleeting moment, everything seemed as it always had, peaceful, predictable, and full of promise. But as the day progressed, the normalcy shattered. In the quiet of the hallway, I heard footsteps approaching, and before I could grasp what was happening, Michael's voice, cold and resolute, cut through the silence like a knife. "Dad, you're not welcome here anymore." I stood frozen in disbelief, unable to process the sudden and brutal rejection. Michael's face, usually so familiar and, at one time, filled with affection, now bore an expression of stern finality that left no room for negotiation. "I'm tired of your constant advice, your interference in my life," he declared, his tone devoid of any warmth. "Your old-fashioned views and outdated habits are holding me back from moving forward." Each word hit me with the force of betrayal, unraveling decades of memories, sacrifices, and a father's unyielding love. In that instant, the foundation of our family, once built on shared experiences and deep-seated trust, crumbled into irreparable fragments. I tried to speak, to plead for an explanation, but the words died on my lips as Michael's resolve became unmistakable. The man I had known as a loving son was transformed into a stranger, his eyes hard and unyielding. Standing in the doorway of what had once been my sanctuary, I felt the weight of years of service, of sleepless nights and battles fought, reduced to a single, shattering moment of rejection. The echoes of his harsh words reverberated in the silence, a grim reminder that nothing would ever be the same again. In the moments that followed, time seemed to slow to an agonizing crawl. I found myself reflecting on the years when I had poured every ounce of my being into nurturing our family, when each shared smile and every embrace had woven the tapestry of our life together. How had it all come to this? How had the unconditional love I offered become a burden in his eyes? The questions swirled in my mind, mingling with a deep, gnawing sorrow that I had never before experienced. The shock of being cast out by the very person I had loved so fiercely left me numb, and for a long while, I stood on the threshold of the house that had been my home, paralyzed by disbelief. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. I was no longer welcome in the place where I had built my life, where memories of laughter and shared dreams once filled every room. Michael's declaration was final, and with each word, I felt the painful severing of a bond that had been my life's anchor. I stepped back slowly, unable to muster even a word of protest, as the reality of my exile sank in. I had been cast out not with anger alone, but with an almost clinical precision, a calculated decision that left no room for reconciliation or compromise. In that fateful moment, I understood that I was now a stranger in my own home, forced to confront a future that was as uncertain as it was bleak. The man who had once been a proud father, eager to share the wisdom of his experiences, now found himself stripped of his identity, standing in the doorway of a life that had suddenly become alien and inhospitable. Every memory, every shared moment of joy and sorrow, seemed to mock me as I grappled with the stark reality of rejection. Michael's eyes, once filled with the love of a son, now burned with a cold determination that left me questioning whether any remnants of our past could ever be reclaimed. As I slowly turned away from the house that had once been a symbol of my legacy, my heart ached with a profound sadness, a mourning for the loss of a connection that had defined so much of my life. I felt as if the very ground beneath my feet had shifted, leaving me adrift in a world that no longer made sense. The rejection was not just an isolated incident. It was the beginning of a painful unraveling, a fracture that would reshape the rest of my days. And so, with nothing left to cling to but a collection of bittersweet memories, I took my first tentative steps into an uncertain future, burdened by the weight of regret and the relentless ache of a broken bond. Cast out onto the unforgiving streets of Chicago, I was abruptly thrust into a harsh reality where every moment was a fight for survival. The chill of the early morning air bit at my skin as I stepped away from the only home I had ever known. Without the comfort of familiar walls and the solace of family, I was left to navigate the sprawling city alone, confronting the bitter winds, the deafening silence of abandoned streets, and the relentless noise of a metropolis that seemed indifferent to my plight. The first days were a blur of confusion and despair as I sought shelter in dark alleys, under bridges, and wherever the urban landscape might offer a temporary refuge from the biting cold. I soon discovered that the city's compassion was as sporadic as its shadows. Attempts to secure a place in local shelters were met with long queues, bureaucratic red tape, and the harsh reality that resources were stretched thin. I had to make painful choices every day, whether to save what little money I had for a hot meal or use it to secure a night's stay in a crowded, noisy shelter. The nights were the worst, a ceaseless barrage of loneliness, the echo of distant sirens, and a pervasive sense of vulnerability that made every dark corner seem treacherous. Concrete walls, harsh streetlights, and the indifferent hum of passing cars painted a picture of a world that had suddenly turned hostile and unwelcoming. In my wanderings through the city's labyrinth of sidewalks and abandoned lots, I encountered both the harshness of indifference and fleeting acts of kindness. Some strangers, catching a glimpse of my distress, would offer a warm cup of coffee, a spare coat, or even a few encouraging words that, however brief, rekindled a flicker of hope. I began to document these small acts of generosity in a worn notebook, each entry a testament to the resilience of the human spirit even in the face of overwhelming adversity. This collection of moments, shared smiles, empathetic gestures, and brief, genuine connections became my lifeline, a reminder that even amidst the crushing weight of rejection, humanity still persisted in subtle, meaningful ways. Every day became a lesson in resourcefulness and determination. I learned to navigate the city's sprawling network of transit lines and back alleys, discovering hidden corners where a semblance of privacy could be found. Each new dawn brought with it a renewed resolve to face the day, even if the challenges were as relentless as the winter wind. Slowly, I began to adapt to this unforgiving existence, realizing that survival was not merely about enduring the cold and hunger, but about preserving the dignity that had been so brutally stripped away. The city, with all its imperfections and indifference, forced me to confront the raw realities of life in a way I had never imagined possible. Despite the overwhelming hardships, I clung to the belief that there was still a part of me that could be salvaged. I started to build a fragile routine, one that involved seeking out community centers that offered meals, talking to local volunteers who had dedicated themselves to helping those in need, and finding solace in the stories of others who had faced similar fates. In the midst of the daily struggle, these encounters provided brief respites from the darkness, moments that reminded me of a time when I believed in the inherent goodness of people. Slowly but surely, I began to see that even a shattered life could be pieced back together with care, persistence, and the unexpected kindness of strangers. The battle for survival was not only a physical one, it was deeply emotional and spiritual. Each night, as I lay awake under the open sky or in a cramped shelter, I grappled with feelings of abandonment and loss. But in those long, solitary hours, I also found a renewed determination to reclaim my sense of self, to honor the memories of better times and build a future that, while uncertain, was my own. The struggle was arduous, and every small victory, a hot meal, a kind word, a safe place to rest, felt like a triumph against the odds. Even in the coldest, darkest moments, I could not entirely let go of the hope that someday I would find a way back to a life of dignity and warmth. And so, day by day, I persevered. The streets of Chicago, once a symbol of harsh rejection, slowly began to reveal the possibility of a second chance. Though each step was fraught with difficulty, I came to understand that my journey was not solely defined by loss, but by the relentless pursuit of a future where survival was intertwined with the rediscovery of hope. In that struggle, I learned that even when the world seems indifferent, the small, unyielding sparks of humanity can ignite the courage needed to press on. In the months that followed my abrupt expulsion from the only home I had ever known, I found myself alone with my thoughts and the quiet, relentless passage of time. The days blurred into nights as I sought refuge in temporary shelters and the occasional kindness of strangers, each moment an opportunity to reflect on a past that now seemed both distant and painfully intimate. In the midst of the harsh realities of life on the streets, a subtle transformation began to take root within me, a slow, almost imperceptible shift from bitter despair to a cautious, yet enduring hope. I began to wonder if, somehow, the shattered fragments of my former life could be pieced together into something new and meaningful. During my time in a modest shelter, I encountered people from all walks of life, each with their own story of loss and redemption. Around me, individuals who had once lost everything were gradually finding reasons to smile again, reasons that were often as simple as a shared meal, a heartfelt conversation, or a warm gesture from a compassionate soul. It was in these moments, listening to the stories of others and sharing my own, that I discovered a universal truth. Hope often blossoms in the most unlikely places. I started to write in a worn journal, pouring out my thoughts and experiences as a way to process the overwhelming emotions that had accompanied my descent into homelessness. Every entry was a small act of defiance against the darkness that threatened to consume me, a declaration that, despite everything, I still believed in the possibility of renewal. As I navigated the difficult days of survival, I slowly began to see that the very trials I endured were also the crucible in which a new perspective was forged. I reflected on the years of military service, the countless sacrifices I had made for a cause greater than myself, and the eventual longing to return to a life where love and connection reigned supreme. I came to realize that the pain of rejection and the bitter taste of isolation were not signs of my failure, but rather the harsh catalysts for change, reminders that life, in its most raw form, demanded both the strength to endure and the humility to forgive. In my quiet moments of introspection, I recalled the vibrant memories of family gatherings, the soft laughter of shared stories with Susan, and even the small joys that Michael and I had once celebrated together. Those memories, though tinged with sadness, began to kindle a fragile flame of hope within me, a hope that perhaps one day reconciliation might be possible. I started writing letters, not only to myself but also to Michael, each word carefully chosen to bridge the gap between our disparate worlds. I did not know if he would ever read them, but the act of writing became a meditative process, a way of reclaiming my identity and mending the broken pieces of a long-forgotten bond. The passage of time, relentless and indifferent, gradually revealed that healing was a journey marked by both setbacks and small victories. I found solace in the simple beauty of everyday moments, a warm sunrise over the city skyline, the gentle murmur of voices in a community center, or the smile of a stranger who took a moment to acknowledge my existence. With every small kindness I encountered, I felt my heart mend just a little more, reawakening to the possibility that even the deepest wounds might one day be healed. Now, as I sit by a window in the shelter and watch the city stir with the promise of a new day, I feel an emerging sense of clarity and acceptance. The path ahead remains uncertain, and the pain of the past is never far behind, yet there is a persistent light, a quiet assurance that with time, love, and understanding, even the most broken of relationships can be transformed. I have come to understand that forgiveness is not a sign of weakness, but rather the ultimate act of courage, a willingness to release the burdens of anger and regret in favor of a future built on compassion and renewed connection. In this newfound space of reflection, I embrace the lessons of my past and look forward to a future where every new morning offers a chance to rebuild. Though the journey has been fraught with hardship and loss, it has also opened my eyes to the enduring power of hope, a power that, even in the darkest of nights, can guide us toward the dawn of a brighter tomorrow. And so, with a steady heart and a mind tempered by experience, I choose to believe that the bonds of family and love, though strained by time and circumstance, can one day be restored, paving the way for a new chapter of redemption and grace.